13 films lost Hollywood tens of millions of dollars in 1985, and several of them destroyed careers, bankrupted studios, and nearly killed Disney animation altogether. Back to the Future earned close to $200 million that year, but these movies crashed in spectacular fashion, and what went wrong with each of them tells us everything about how Hollywood operated in the mid-80s. Most people have never heard of My Science Project, which makes it the most forgotten entry on this entire list. August 9th, 1985 was its opening date, landing just 4 weeks after Back to the Future had already captured every teenager in America, and sharing that same weekend with Real Genius meant the competition was impossible to overcome. Touchstone Pictures poured somewhere between $10 and $12 million into this teen adventure centered on a mysterious alien device called the Gizmo. 4 security guards stood watch when that prop was revealed to cast and crew, and a $1 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy backed the whole thing up. All that paranoia turned grimly ironic when the film vanished from theaters after just 2 weeks, pulling in only $4.1 million. Dennis Hopper showed up fresh from rehab and delivered the film's most memorable moment by wearing his iconic Easy Rider costume, complete with fringe leather jacket and bush hat, a deliberate wink to audiences who remembered his counterculture days. Critics tore it apart without mercy. Rotten Tomatoes shows an 11% score, and the New York Times called it a far less clever and less expensive version of Back to the Future. Director Jonathan Betuel never recovered, and his only subsequent directing credit turned out to be Theodore Rex with Whoopi Goldberg in 1995. A prestige triumph should have been waiting for King David when it arrived in theaters. Director Bruce Beresford came off the Oscar-nominated Tender Mercies. Richard Gere ranked among Hollywood's biggest stars, and Paramount invested between $21 and $22 million. What the studio got instead was a film earning just $5.9 million worldwide, which Beresford himself called a multi-million-dollar joke. Casting created the first crack in the foundation. Beresford wanted an unknown actor, but Paramount forced Richard Gere on him, and that creative clash poisoned everything that followed. Production fractured into warring camps where Beresford did what he wanted in scenes without Gere, and Gere did whatever he wanted in his own scenes. Beresford's own assessment was brutal, comparing himself to the captain of the Titanic heading toward a critical iceberg and adding simply that he hit it. Gere's contemporary American persona struck critics as completely wrong for ancient Israel. Sean Connery was actually offered the role of King Saul before asking for too much money, and a Razzie nomination for Worst Actor landed on Gere that year. The studio's hope of attracting Star Wars audiences proved catastrophically misguided. June 1985 brought Perfect to theaters as John Travolta's attempt at recapturing the magic from his Saturday Night Fever and Grease glory days. Columbia Pictures invested $20 million in a film trying to merge serious journalism ethics with sexy aerobics sequences, and that combination satisfied absolutely no one. Variety called it guilty of the sins it condemns, namely superficiality, manipulation, and smugness, before declaring that on any level, Perfect is an embarrassment. The Washington Post described it as a trashy movie about women jumping up and down in leotards. Timing created the fundamental problem. The aerobics craze was already fading by 1985, which meant audiences expecting a dance movie ended up watching journalism ethics drama with workout montages scattered throughout. Box office receipts landed at just $12.9 million worldwide, and the Razzies handed out nominations for Worst Actor, Worst Supporting Actress, and Worst Screenplay. Travolta's career took the real damage. Another film didn't come until 1989's Look Who's Talking, and during that gap, he seriously considered quitting Hollywood to become a commercial pilot. Nearly a decade passed before Quentin Tarantino cast him in Pulp Fiction and restored his A-list status. Real Genius landed in 990 theaters on August 7, 1985, carrying an $8 million budget. Opening weekend brought in just $2.5 million, and the final domestic total stopped at $12.95 million. Technically profitable, but far short of expectations in a market that Back to the Future dominated. Val Kilmer's performance as genius slacker Chris Knight turned into the film's secret weapon over time. Director Martha Coolidge reflected that Val understood the complicated inner workings of Chris's character. Rolling Stone described his work as a combination of Will Hunting meets Bluto Blutarsky. Kilmer's audition brought pure Chris Knight energy into the room. Producer Brian Grazer remembers him showing up with candy bars and performing tricks. And when Grazer introduced himself as the producer, Kilmer shot back, "I'm sorry, you look like you're 12 years old, and I like to work with men." That iconic finale where a house fills with popcorn required continuous popping for 3 months. Caltech students served as consultants, and the contest subplot mirrors a real 1974 incident where Caltech students gamed a McDonald's sweepstakes by submitting approximately 1/5 of total entries. Decades later, Real Genius finally found its audience. Kate Hudson declared it the best movie of 1985, Mythbusters tested the popcorn scenario in 2009, and STEM communities everywhere still celebrate it as a cult classic that gets better with every rewatch. Production chaos on Enemy Mine rivals any disaster on this list. Richard Long Crane began filming as director in April 1984, but Fox shut everything down after 3 weeks in Budapest and Iceland because the dailies looked like planet Earth. Louis Gossett Jr.'s alien costume made the whole thing look like a cheap 50s horror movie. $9 million had already been spent, with pay or play contracts worth another $18 million hanging overhead. Terry Gilliam was considered, but chose Brazil instead. Wolfgang Petersen initially refused by saying he wasn't the kind of director who can jump on a plane and finish someone else's work. But reading the script changed his mind 48 hours later. Budget ballooned from $17 million to $40 million. Box office receipts landed between $12.3 and $14.3 million, creating losses exceeding $26 million. Fox's marketing chief admitted publicly that it was an extremely difficult movie to market. The story of enemies becoming friends made it about brotherhood rather than sci-fi spectacle. And the studio even added a subplot because executives worried audiences wouldn't understand that mine was possessive rather than referring to underground excavation. Cable television provided vindication years later. Endless HBO play cultivated a devoted fan base that grew larger than any theatrical audience ever was. And Louis Gossett Jr. still performs his Drac voice at convention appearances decades after the original release. April 12, 1985 brought Ladyhawke to theaters with a $20 million budget, Matthew Broderick, and 2 gorgeous leads in Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer. Domestic returns stopped at $18.4 million, translating to approximately $2 million in losses. But the commercial disappointment stemmed largely from one controversial decision about music. Director Richard Donner was listening to the Alan Parsons Project while scouting Italian locations, and became unable to separate his visual ideas from that music. Critics called it cream of the crop when it comes to atrocious scores, describing crazy disco beats violating the atmosphere. Rutger Hauer himself has publicly criticized the score. Kurt Russell was originally cast as Captain Navarre before dropping out days before filming. 3 reasons drove his departure: costume issues where he declared he doesn't wear tights, production delays, and falling in love with Goldie Hawn, which meant he didn't want 8 months in Italy away from her. Police Academy 2 and Cat's Eye both outperformed Ladyhawke at the box office. A devoted cult following emerged through home video, and the Frisian horse playing Goliath, a 19-year-old stallion named Othello, helped popularize that entire breed across North America. Steven Spielberg's name sat above the title of Young Sherlock Holmes, backed by an $18 million budget. Domestic returns reached $19.7 million, with worldwide totals climbing to $63.7 million. But the film's true significance lies in making cinematic history while failing commercially. That stained glass night sequence represents the first fully computer-generated character in film history. Lucasfilm's Pixar Computer Animation Group spent 4 months completing the effect, with John Lasseter, future creator of Toy Story, serving as animator. Guinness World Records officially recognizes it as the first film character ever computer-generated. What happened with that CGI technology extended far beyond this film. Spielberg originally planned stop-motion dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, but techniques pioneered here convinced him CGI dinosaurs were actually possible and could look convincing on the big screen. Critics consistently compared it unfavorably to Indiana Jones. Pauline Kael wrote that there's a resounding hollowness at the center of this picture, and the downbeat ending proved commercially fatal. Once word spread, it was too gloomy for the pre-Christmas market. Writer Chris Columbus crafted a script anticipating his later Harry Potter films. Boarding school setting, young protagonists, dark secrets among staff, and fantasy elements woven throughout. Hollywood's most tragic what might have been stories include Explorers Near the Top. Director Joe Dante was riding high from Gremlins when Paramount's leadership changed mid-production. with Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg departing for Disney. Executives moved the release from late August to early July, demanding the film compete in summer whether ready or not. Ready, it was not. Dante's account sounds devastating even decades later. Executives told him to just stop editing because they were putting it out regardless, and his 3-hour 15-minute assembly cut lost 86 minutes. Scenes had to be redubbed under a tree for some sense of closure, and when young actors arrived on the spaceship set, the concrete wasn't even dry and their feet were sinking into it. $25 million went into production, but only $9.87 million came back. Opening weekend faced Back to the Future, released 9 days earlier, and Live Aid broadcast the very next day. Two extraordinary careers launched from the wreckage. Ethan Hawke and River Phoenix made their feature debuts after a nationwide search involving 3,000 young actors. Phoenix's upbringing in South American communes meant he was unfamiliar with North American pop culture, and his mispronunciations became a running joke during rehearsals. Dante has searched for deleted footage without success, and all of it is presumed lost. Dorothy being sent to a psychiatric hospital for electroshock treatment because of her delusions about Oz is how Return to Oz opens, and from that point forward, everything only gets darker. $28 million went into production, but just $11.1 million came back. Walter Murch, the legendary film editor and sound designer, was making his directorial debut when Disney fired him 1 week into production. Murch reached out to Coppola, Spielberg, and George Lucas, and all three lobbied Disney to rehire him. Lucas flew from Japan to London specifically to make the case, even offering to direct himself if Murch fell behind. Disney relented. Imagery in the finished film terrified audiences. Princess Mombi's Hall of Heads featured over 30 severed heads in glass cabinets that she switches between, and the menacing Wheelers moved on stilts with wheels for hands. Critics described scenes as almost only for adults. Gary Kurtz, who had produced Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, served as executive producer and put his own money into the production. Bankruptcy came for him after failure, and in 2005, he auctioned Star Wars memorabilia to offset lingering debts. Disney's marketing campaign was described as atrocious for playing up fun rather than actual dark tone. Audiences expecting a Technicolor musical rejected what critics called a dark, twisted, and terrifying nightmare. A marketing dream seemed to be waiting for Clue when Paramount greenlit the project. The first major film based on a board game would feature 3 different endings distributed to different theaters, theoretically driving repeat viewings. $15 million went into production, but the gimmick backfired completely. Director Jonathan Lynn explained the miscalculation. Audiences decided they didn't know which ending to go to, so they didn't go at all. Michael McKean diagnosed the problem perfectly. People don't want to buy a pig in a pub, they want to know they're getting the good ending. His follow-up question captured the confusion. Do I have to see it 3 times, and what if I get the same ending again? Box office stopped at $14.6 million. A 4th ending was filmed, but cut, one where Wadsworth poisons everyone and commits the perfect crime. Lynn's assessment, it really wasn't very good. Madeline Kahn's legendary improvised monologue about flames only appeared in ending C, meaning 2/3 of theatrical audiences never saw it. Michael McKean recalled she went into a fugue about hatred and each take was funnier than the last. Tim Curry landed Wadsworth as 3rd choice after Leonard Rossiter passed, and Rowan Atkinson was deemed too unknown for American audiences at the time. Curry has since cited Clue as one of his favorite movies from his entire career. Cult status exploded through home video, where all 3 endings played sequentially, and shadowcast midnight screenings began in 2002 following the Rocky Horror tradition. $50 million made Santa Claus, the movie the most expensive Christmas film ever produced. The Salkind producers came fresh from Superman and applied that same epic origin story approach to Father Christmas, building Santa's workshop on Pinewood Studios' legendary 007 stage. Ticket sales brought in just $23.7 million, translating to losses exceeding $26 million. Structural problems proved impossible to overcome. The first half presented a warm origin story set in the Middle Ages that audiences received well, but then the narrative jolted into 1980s New York with Dudley Moore's elf and John Lithgow's villain. Critics found that tonal shift jarring. Product placement outraged American critics. McDonald's appeared prominently, including one scene where a homeless orphan stares longingly through the restaurant window. Coca-Cola cans showed up conspicuously, and critic Alonso Duralde cited blatant product placement as a major reason for rejection. John Lithgow's 2019 assessment was blunt. One of the tackiest movies he'd ever appeared in, adding it seemed cheesy and never stuck in America, but is huge in England. A 2023 Guardian analysis confirmed the film became the most repeated Christmas film on British television, airing 21 times since release. British millennials consider it essential holiday viewing. The Salkind's career effectively ended here. Ilya Salkind didn't produce another film for 7 years. Disney Animation nearly collapsed because of the Black Cauldron. The studio's most ambitious animated film carried $44 million, making it the most expensive animated production ever, but ticket sales stopped at just $21.3 million. Development began in 1971, and production suffered a devastating blow in September 1979 when Don Bluth and 14 animators walked out. Tim Burton contributed character designs including the Horned King, but his work was rejected as too strange and unusual. That experience drove Burton to leave Disney permanently. Test screenings in 1984 produced horror stories. Children ran screaming from the theater, and newly appointed chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg was shocked and horrified. Katzenberg demanded cuts, but producer Joe Hale refused. What happened next became legendary. Katzenberg personally went into the edit bay and began physically cutting the film with scissors, removing approximately 12 minutes before CEO Michael Eisner called to stop him. The Care Bears movie, produced for just $2 million, outgrossed Disney's $44 million spectacle. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, directed by the departed Tim Burton, also performed better. Disney animators found themselves removed from Burbank and relocated to a Glendale warehouse. Katzenberg seriously considered disbanding animation entirely, and the film wasn't released on home video for 13 years. What emerged from that restructuring ultimately produced the Disney Renaissance. The Little Mermaid, Beauty, and the Beast, and Aladdin all trace their origins to lessons learned from this disaster. The most catastrophic box office failure of 1985 belongs to Revolution. $28 million went into this American Revolution epic starring Al Pacino, but ticket sales brought back just $346,761, meaning the studio recovered less than 2% of its investment. Razzie nominations arrived in 4 categories. Director Hugh Hudson came fresh from Chariots of Fire's 4 Oscar wins, and Goldcrest Films bet its entire future on what they hoped would be another triumph. Everything fell apart instead. Pacino contracted pneumonia during filming in rain-soaked King's Lynn, Norfolk, costing a full month of shooting. Nastassja Kinski stopped speaking to Hudson entirely, and her absences cost over $500,000. Producer Irwin Winkler frequently flew to the U.S. for Rocky IV, leaving no authority figure to mediate growing conflicts. Christmas Day, 1985 brought an incomplete film to theaters, rushed out for Oscar consideration that never materialized. Pauline Kael wrote that everything in this picture seems dissociated, and Time Out delivered the most cutting review. Was there a director? I didn't catch the credit. Pacino's reflection revealed how deeply the experience affected him. They put half a film out, and I was appalled and shocked. That single film took the rug out from under me, and I lost interest in the business for a while. 4 years passed before Pacino appeared in another film, and his career only recovered with Sea of Love in 1989. Goldcrest Films nearly collapsed, and the company sold for £5 million in what industry observers described as the biggest box office disaster in British movie history. Hugh Hudson released a director's cut in 2009 that Philip French of the London Observer called a masterpiece. But Hudson's career never recovered. Only 3 more films followed, and Hudson admitted he became a useless director after Revolution destroyed his reputation. Hollywood reshaped itself in lasting ways because of what happened in 1985. Disney's near collapse with the Black Cauldron led directly to the animation renaissance of the late 80s and 90s, and the CGI breakthrough in young Sherlock Holmes, though commercially ignored at the time, enabled Jurassic Park's dinosaurs years later. Clue and Return to Oz found devoted audiences through home video rentals, validating the emerging market that studios had initially feared would cannibalize their theatrical business. What stands out most looking back is how many of these disasters eventually became beloved classics. Clue, Real Genius, Return to Oz, Ladyhawke, and Explorers. all carry more cultural weight today than many of 1985's actual hits, proving that the most interesting films are sometimes the ones nobody saw the first time around. If you remember catching any of these in theaters back in 1985, drop a comment and let us know which ones you saw. And if you discovered them later on cable or VHS like most people did, you're definitely not alone.